My friends, viewers, prepare your hearts. Today we dive into a saga of impossible engineering, unwavering faith, and the mockery of a world about to be judged. The story of a man, Noah, tasked with building the impossible, with the fate of humanity in his hands. The divine order was clear, but the details were a nightmare. 137 min long, 23 meters wide, 3 full floors. My dears, imagine the scene. The Bible gives the exact measurements, but it doesn't say how to build. It doesn't explain how to fell trees the size of buildings, how to move trunks weighing tons without cranes, how to fit wood together without iron nails, how to seal a giant structure so that not a single drop of water gets in. Noah received the order, but he had to figure out how to make it a reality on his own. For decades, he and his sons woke up every day facing the same challenge: to build the largest vessel the world had ever seen, with no manual, no experience, no one to teach them. And every day the neighbors passed by and laughed. The scorn, the mockery. How do you build something impossible when all you have is faith and an axe? And the first question, the most absurd of all: where do you build a giant ship when there is no sea nearby? The question seems absurd, but Noah had no choice. God commanded, "Build an ark." He didn't say where, he didn't explain how to choose the location. He just gave the measurements and said, "Do it." So, my friends, what did he do? Noah probably looked around and thought, as any builder would, I need space, a lot of space, because 137 m is longer than a football field, and 23-meter wide means you can't build on just any narrow piece of land. Therefore, the first task was not to cut wood, it was to find and prepare the right place. A flat, firm piece of land, large enough far from slopes that could collapse near a forest, because transporting wood from far away would be impossible. They are near drinking water, but not so close that floods would disrupt the work. And after choosing, then comes the brutal work that no one mentions: removing stones, pulling up roots, compacting the soil so it wouldn't sink under the weight of the structure. No backhoes, no trucks, just shovels, pickaxes, brute force, and time. But there's another detail. A detail that could ruin everything: the rain. When it rains on a poorly planned construction site, it turns into a mud pit, tool sink, wood rots, work stops. Therefore, Noah probably needed to create drainage channels around the area, directing water away. Small ditches dug strategically so the site would remain dry even during storms. And while Noah sweated, digging, leveling, preparing, his neighbors passed by. Some laughed, others shook their heads. A man preparing a giant piece of land to build a ship far from any river or ocean. Madness! It could only be madness. But here's the big twist. What they didn't understand: Noah wasn't building for the world that existed. He was building for the world that was about to disappear underwater. Weeks, maybe months later, the land was ready. Flat, firm, drained. But now came the challenge that would make everything else seem small: getting enough wood to build something the size of a 4-story building. How many trees do you need to cut down to build something the size of a modern ship? Mature cypress trees take decades, sometimes centuries to grow. They are tall trees with thick, heavy trunks. A single one of these trees can weigh several tons. And to build a 137-meter structure, hundreds of trees, maybe thousands. But felling a giant tree with a bronze axe is not like chopping firewood. Bronze dulls quickly. You hit the same spot. Wood chips fly, your arms ache, your hands bleed. And after hours, the cut is still not halfway through the trunk. Therefore, 2 men probably worked together, one on each side, alternating blows to keep the rhythm. And when the trunk finally began to give way, came the most dangerous moment. Where would it fall? A 20-meter tree falling in the wrong direction can kill anyone nearby. It can fall on other trees and get stuck. It can crack when it hits the ground and become useless. So Noah and his sons probably cut strategic wedges guiding the fall. They tied ropes to the top to pull it in the right direction. And when the tree finally fell, with a crash that echoed through the forest, the work was just beginning. Because now they had to move that giant trunk to the construction site. And how do you move something the size of a bus without wheels, without tractors? Without cranes? A mature cypress trunk easily weighs several tons, lying on the forest floor motionless, defying any attempt to move it. The most likely solution was the same one used by Egyptians, Mesopotamians, and other ancient civilizations: wooden rollers. You cut smaller, thinner trunks, Position several under the large trunk, then tie ropes to the front and start pulling. As the trunk moves forward, rolling over the cylinders, you pick up the rollers left behind and place them back in front. It's slow, brutally exhausting, but it works. But here's the detail that complicates everything: uneven terrain. Rolling trunks on a flat surface is already hard. On slopes, valleys, rocks, it's dangerous! An uncontrolled trunk rolling down a slope becomes a deadly weapon. It can roll over the person guiding it, it can hit rocks and crack, it can fall into ravines and be completely lost. Therefore, before moving any trunk, Noah probably needed to prepare the paths, level the ground, remove large stones, create wide trails. Weeks of extra work just to transport wood safely. And there's another problem: strength. Even with rollers, you need many men pulling ropes simultaneously. Noah had 3 sons. 4 men in total. Could they manage it alone? Difficult. It's possible they hired local workers, people who needed work and didn't care about the strange reasons behind the construction. Each trunk that arrived at the site represented days of effort. Sore muscles, ropes that snapped at the worst moment, sometimes fatal accidents. And while some planks dried, stacked with spacing for air circulation, Noah continued to fell more trees, an endless cycle of work. But soon the part would come that would truly test his skill as a builder, raising the structure without it toppling or sinking. How do you raise a 3-story structure without it collapsing before it's finished? The answer starts with something most people never think about: the keel. The central main beam, which acts as the spine of any vessel. Without it, you just have a pile of planks that can't support themselves. But here's the challenge. The ark's keel needed to be 137 men long. No tree in the world is that tall. Therefore, Noah had to join multiple enormous beams, one spliced into the next, creating a continuous line. Each joint had to be perfect, mortise and tenon joints locked with hardwood dowels, because if the keel cracked or broke, the entire ark would break with it. And after the keel come the ribs, curved beams that rise from the sides giving shape to the hull. But how do you bend wood without breaking it? Steam and heat. You heat the wood slowly, making it flexible. Then you bend it little by little, fixing it in the desired shape until it cools and hardens. A slow, delicate process. A cracked rib means weeks of lost work. Now think about the scale. Dozens of giant ribs needed to be fitted into the keel, spaced evenly, all at the exact angle. An error of a few degrees and the structure becomes crooked, unbalanced, unstable. Therefore, Noah probably used taut ropes as guides, careful markings, stone plumb bobs to check for verticality. And even so, adjusting a multi-ton beam into its perfect fit required coordinated brute force, rudimentary pulleys, levers, men pulling ropes in sync. And there's another critical detail: diagonal braces, crossed beams forming triangles. Why? Because triangles are the most stable geometric shape that exists. Impossible to deform without breaking. Therefore, the internal structure was a complex web of interwoven wood, distributing weight and resisting pressure. When the ark's skeleton was finally standing, Noah looked at that giant structure and realized, now came the part that would decide if it would all float or sink. Sealing every crack, every joint, every microscopic fissure, because a single failure would be enough to kill everyone inside. Bitumen. Pitch plant resin boiled until it became a sticky, toxic, and scalding paste. The Bible is specific. You shall coat it inside and out with pitch. My friends, this double order saved everything, because pitch only on the outside is not enough. Water finds ways. It seeps in from below, rots the wood from the inside out. Therefore, every centimeter needed to be sealed on both sides. But here's the part few imagine: applying pitch to the inside of the ark. Enclosed dark spaces without adequate ventilation, the toxic fumes would concentrate, making the air almost unbreathable. Working in there meant frequently going out for fresh air, going back in, applying more, coming out again. Hours of interrupted work, burns on the hands, irritated skin. And it wasn't just one coat, multiple coats, waiting for it to dry, applying another, checking for cracks, reapplying where necessary. A process that took weeks, maybe months. But the true test of the pitch would only come when the ark was in the water. Until then, it was impossible to know if any joint had failed, if any microscopic crack would allow infiltration. Therefore, each application was an act of faith as much as technique. When the last layer of pitch finally dried, the ark was sealed. But now came the challenge of dividing the giant interior into organized compartments, because thousands of animals would need to live in there for over a year. And without organization, it would be total chaos. How do you organize the inside of a giant structure to house thousands of animals for over a year? The Bible gives a clue, 3 floors, and it mentions compartments. In Hebrew, kinin, which literally means nests or cells, small separate spaces. But why? Because without divisions you would have chaos. Animals fighting, predators attacking prey, diseases spreading rapidly. Therefore each species needed its own space, walls between them, safety. But here's the engineering challenge: building internal walls without compromising the structure. Each wall adds weight, changes the load distribution. Therefore the most likely logic is to put heavy animals on the lower floor. Elephants, rhinos, hippos. A low center of gravity prevents the ark from tipping over. Medium-sized animals on the second floor, lions, bears, horses, and the smallest birds and light creatures on the top floor. Strategic weight distribution to maintain balance. But there's another problem no one thinks about: waste. Thousands of animals producing waste every day. Without a drainage system, the ark would become a toxic sewer in weeks. Diseases would kill everyone before the flood ended. Therefore, there were probably sloped channels in the floors. Small grooves that directed liquids to specific points, perhaps openings in the lower sides, allowing waste to drain out once the ark was floating. Simple but effective. And ventilation. The Bible mentions a window at the top, but that's not enough to ventilate 3 entire floors. There were probably strategic side openings, protected by overhangs to prevent water from entering, but allowing air circulation. Without proper ventilation, heat and gases would build up. Animals suffocating, everyone dying before the water receded. And then there's food storage. A year's worth of food for thousands of animals means tons of hay, grains, dried fruits. Spaces dedicated just for storage, organized for easy access, but protected from moisture. When all this internal structure was finally ready, Noah had built something more complex than a simple ship. But the most critical part was still missing: the door. A huge opening that needed to be strong enough not to compromise the entire structure. The ark's door couldn't be small. Giraffes needed to get in. Elephants, animals of all sizes. Therefore it was a huge opening. And here's the engineering problem: the larger the opening, the weaker the wall becomes. It's a structural weak point. A giant door in a wall that needs to withstand water pressure from all sides. Dangerous. Therefore the location mattered. The Bible mentions the door was on the side, not the front or back. That makes sense. Side walls distribute pressure better than the ends, and a side door allows for better balance during the animal's entry. But the door needed heavy reinforcements around it, extra beams forming a robust frame, thicker wood, stronger joints, all to compensate for the structural weakness of the opening. And there's another interesting detail. The Bible doesn't mention Noah installing latches or locks. Why? Because it says it was God who shut the door. What a revelation! This means Noah built trusting that his part was to make the structure, but the divine sealing would come later. Still, the seal around the door needed to be perfect. Therefore, probably extra layers of pitch, maybe flexible material at the edges, something like plant fibers soaked in resin, acting as a primitive gasket. When the door closed, these fibers would press against the frame, sealing it completely. And think of the size of the hinges needed, or rather the pivot system, because metal hinges would be rare and expensive, probably a reinforced vertical wooden axis, allowing the door to swing. Heavy but functional. When the door was finally installed, tested, sealed, the construction was complete. Decades of work, thousands of hours, mountains of wood transformed into a structure that defied logic. But now came the strangest part of all, something no builder could plan or control. Because suddenly, with no one guiding them, the animals began to appear on their own. How do you test a giant vessel without putting it in the water? You don't. You can't. The ark was built on dry land, far from any body of water large enough. Therefore, the entire decades-long work depended on mental calculations, practical experience, and faith that the proportions given by God would work. But Noah could make some final checks, walking through the entire structure, checking every joint, looking for cracks that appeared as the pitch dried, testing the firmness of the beams, pushing on walls to feel if they were solid or if something gave way. And he probably loaded provisions progressively. Bags of grain, bales of hay, jars of water, observing how the structure reacted to the added weight, listening. Because wood under pressure makes sounds, it creaks, groans, cracks, and if something was wrong, Noah would hear it. But the real surprise came when the animals began to appear. The Bible says they came to Noah 2 by 2. They weren't hunted, they weren't dragged, they came on their own. Imagine the scene, my friends. Animals migrating spontaneously from all directions. Predators walking peacefully alongside prey. Birds flying and landing near the entrance. Reptiles crawling, all converging on the same place as if an invisible force was guiding them. And here's the detail that seals it all. Each animal went straight to its compartment without confusion, without fights, as if they knew exactly where they were supposed to be. This was no longer a human project. It was something beyond Noah's ability to control or explain. When the last animal entered, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons and their wives entered too. 8 people in total. And then what was written happened. God shut the door. The construction was complete. But now the real test began. How did Noah and his family survive inside the ark during all those days of the flood? If this saga of the greatest construction in history captivated you, you can't miss what happened inside. Click here to watch how Noah survived inside the ark during the flood. Click the video on the screen now.